This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
According to a report issued in Rome by the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, cereal prices have sharply increased this season.
The World Food Programme renewed its appeal to the international community to provide the necessary funds for humanitarian work across the world. There are approximately 2 billion people threatened by hunger and food shortages.
تعاني دول عديدة أفريقية وعربية من مشاكل المجاعات وارتفاع أسعار المواد.
Many African and Arab countries suffer from famine, high food costs, and diminishing sources of income. This weakens the buying power, leading to negative consequences in all areas of life. In Iraq, food shortages have been a continuous story that has been known and discussed for many years. This problem has worsened in recent years. According to some reports, the price of cereal has greatly multiplied in relatively short periods of time, making many segments of society incapable of fulfilling their nutritional needs. In Haiti, the needs of those who are hungry have led to many deaths and injuries. There had been early warning attempts to address the terrible and deteriorating food conditions in the country for many years. However, all attempts to avoid the current dire consequences have failed.
من جهة أخرى وإلى جانب الكوارث التي تضيف سنويا عشرات
In Asia, natural catastrophes add hundreds of millions of people to the list of the hungry. Asia is known for its low wages. The rising cost of rice, coupled with serious demands for raising wages, threatens plans for economic growth. But the global dangers of food shortages and food price inflation are not limited to poor countries. Even the largest of donor countries, like the U.S., suffer from the spread of hunger. Washington admits that millions of Americans face many difficulties in securing food. According to anti-hunger organizations, the situation there is not much different from other crisis-ridden areas of the world. The lives of some such segments in U.S. society are similar to others in advanced countries. This draws a grim picture that clearly demonstrates that hunger is still the most lethal weapon. It awaits international solidarity, which is still missing.
Hello there. We begin with the growing food crisis from around the world. Staple foods are being priced higher and increasingly out of reach for millions. The UN says speculation in the world's commodities markets is fueling the problem. But there are others who say the crisis has been 2 decades in the making. But whatever the cause, the effects are all too real for the world's poorest who are paying the price. Let's take a look at the escalating prices in some basic commodities. In the last 12 months alone, the average price of wheat has risen by a staggering 130%. Soya now costs 87% more than it did a year ago. The price of rice has risen by 74%, 10% last week alone. Well, that escalation has led to tensions in several parts of the world. Haiti has faced a number of violent protests in the last 3 days. A tense calm has since settled in the capital Port-au-Prince. UN troops have removed roadblocks set up by protesters, and some businesses have reopened. Prices of food there have risen 40% since the middle of last year. Egypt has also seen riots, its worst in over 30 years, as Shireen Tadros reports.
2 weeks ago, Manel's 53-year-old husband Adil was beaten to death by a group of young thieves. Adil wasn't wearing expensive clothes. He had no money on him, she told me. The boys were trying to steal the bread Adil was carrying, and Manel says she can just about understand why the thieves did it.
If the prices in the country weren't so high, the boys wouldn't have stolen the bread in that way. Maybe they stole it because they don't have enough money to buy food. And so at the end, the head of our family died over a piece of bread.
But it's not just the price of bread that has shot up suddenly. In the last 3 months, the price of basic foods, including rice, pasta and cooking oil, have been particularly affected, with prices in some cases at more than double what they were at the start of the year.
For the 15 million or so Egyptians who live here at or below the poverty line, the spiraling prices have had a devastating effect. But they've also hit all sections of Egyptian society who are now complaining that the government hasn't just mismanaged this crisis, it's also been too slow to respond to it.
This was shown in demonstrations across Egypt in past weeks, and most recently the violence in Mahalla at the largest textile factory in the country. The Egyptian government runs one of the biggest subsidy projects in the world. It's promised to try and make more subsidized wheat and flour available to ease the crisis. But some analysts say it's likely the protests will spread throughout the country, not only because of rising food prices.
As a result of this, the problem of inflation is a problem which does not hit only poor people, but it hits also, middle-class families in Egypt. So this is, I think, one of the reasons that there is a general feeling of frustration at government policies, and this is also the reason that there has been a large degree of sympathy with the call for strike, which was launched by groups of workers and young people.
Gamal Hussein has run his small food stand in this Cairo suburb for over 17 years. But in all his time, he says he's never seen so many people suffering.
3 months ago, I used to make £500 a month. Now I make half that. 50 piastres, half an Egyptian pound, used to buy enough full beans to feed 2 or 3 people. Now you can hardly feed a small child with 50 piastres. But that's all people have to spend.
And this was echoed by stall owners everywhere. They say the price of rice and grain is going up so fast, they don't even bother to write up the prices on the boards. In Egyptian dialect, the word for bread is aish. It literally means life. And for many of the 45 million people here that rely on subsidized food like bread from the government, the situation is becoming a matter of life and death. And people from across the social divide seem like they're no longer prepared to stay quiet. Shireen Tadros, Al Jazeera, Cairo.
War or no war? Or is it a continuation of the state of neither war nor peace? Many questions surround the upcoming possible scenarios in the Middle East. Israel is conducting their largest military maneuver thus far, while in Syria, the military and security forces are carrying out civil defense training. Yet, in spite of all this, the top officials on both sides are exchanging messages of reassurance. There are more complications on the Palestinian front and even tenser conditions in regards to Hezbollah. Khalid Al-Kashif has more details in the following report.
بينما تجري إسرائيل أوسع مناورات عسكرية في تاريخها العسكري بمشاركة الحكومة ومؤسسات الدولة والجيش.
Israel is conducting the largest military maneuver in its history, which includes everyone on the internal front, including the government, state organizations, and the army. It's getting ready to face a war. There is a belief that this is part of an upcoming offensive war in the area. In the midst of its military maneuvers, Israel sent a political message to Syria, including a suggestion to hasten negotiations on the Syrian front. The message also warned of any strike by Hezbollah against Israel, because Syria will pay the price, according to Tel Aviv. It also confirmed that the maneuvers are not targeted against Syria. Syria responded, expressing its desire to resume negotiations, but said that these negotiations will not be expedited until after the U.S. elections. Syria demanded for assurance from the U.S. U.S., guaranteeing regional agreements. The price that Israel would pay in return is the Golan Heights. It aims to break the ties between Iran and Syria, as well as Hezbollah and Hamas. Ehud Barak, leader of the Labour Party, carries the flag of expediting the negotiations between Syria and Israel. Meanwhile, he reiterates his belief that trying to reach a solution on the Palestinian issues is futile. He prefers going into the next elections with an agenda relating to Syria rather than the Palestinian issues. Dense fog looms over the Israeli-Lebanese front, where developments might call for military activity by Hezbollah against Israel, especially after the assassination of its military operative, Imam Munir. Meanwhile, Syria is calling for self-restraint, at least for the time being. It is coldest at the Palestinian front, where Mahmoud Abbas and Ehud Olmert are pessimistic about reaching a final solution this year. The U.S. leadership is outgoing, the Israeli government is weak, and the Palestinian presidency has been shaken by the ongoing crisis in Gaza. Khalid Al-Kashif, Al-Arabiya.
في غزة. خالد الكاشف، العربية.
Another bloody morning in Gaza as revenge for the Palestinian military operation at the Nahal Oz crossing point. 15 Israeli tanks, in addition to several bulldozers and helicopters, invaded Gaza, martyring one person. There were also clashes between Israeli soldiers and members of the Al-Aqsa brigades, which injured 5 of them. The Israeli military operation came hours after one Palestinian was martyred in an Israeli military raid on Khan Yunis. Zohar Sakalla reports from Gaza.
The occupation army has reacted in several ways as a response to the Palestinian military operation in Nahl Oz. They have prevented fuel and food from reaching the people in Gaza. Israeli planes also have been targeting a group of resistance fighters in eastern Khan Yunis, which lies in northern Gaza, murdering 2 from Al-Qassam brigades.
The resistance has proven by its unique and qualitative operations that it is strong and courageous. The Zionist enemy will fail in achieving its goals. Our government remains, our weapons remain, and the resistance remains. God willing, we will continue launching the missiles.
Before the blood of the martyrs even dried up in Khan Yunis, the bulldozers of the occupation were invading deep inside Al-Burj refugee camp in the middle of Gaza. The leaders of the occupation army said that this military response is not final and vowed that more will come.
I think that they will hit Gaza militarily at this time.
They want to hit and humiliate everyone who walks on the street. This is the only thing left for them to do.
Israel began to implement its threats and vowed to target the political leaders of Palestinian factions, but the resistance has done all that it can to deter the aggression. What is left for Israel to do to the Palestinians in Gaza so that the world would move to save whatever is left? People here repeatedly ask this question. Perhaps an explosion is about to erupt here. This is not only my view, but also the view of experts on such issues. Zohair Saqallah, Dubai Television, Gaza.
The government of the occupation continues to make many decisions pertaining to Gaza to achieve the results that are becoming more difficult to attain. They decided to close down the Nahal Oz crossing point and cut the supply of fuel, food, and medicine to people in Gaza. Israel also halted all economic activities and trading in the lands that are supposed to be the home of a future Palestinian state. Mohammed Saeed reports from occupied Jerusalem.
Israel knows that tightening the siege on Gaza is causing a humanitarian catastrophe, but it still prevents the fuel, medicine, and food from reaching Gaza through Nahl al-Uz crossing point, following the latest Palestinian military operation, which killed 2 Israelis.
I assure you that our response to Hamas will stop it from continuing its operations against Israeli citizens. I do not want to say more than that.
Closing off the Nahl al-Oz crossing point was accompanied by military operations aimed at destroying the Palestinian infrastructure. Israel has stopped 97% of the activities in Gaza's factories. The total losses have reached $500 million in Gaza, which continues to lose $50 million a month. According to the Popular Committee for Fighting the Siege, sick Palestinian people are facing a dangerous situation. There are more than 1,000 Palestinians who are waiting to be medically treated abroad. Despite this, Israel believes that it can reach a peace agreement with the Palestinians by the end of this year, but it seems impossible to achieve.
The Palestinian Authority must change its position completely towards the negotiations, because continuing negotiations with Israel without ending internal divisions among Palestinians will strengthen these divisions.
In addition to the daily killings which the occupation authorities carry out by shelling and starving the Palestinians, they have taken more decisions to strengthen the siege and starve the Palestinians even more. Meanwhile, people in Gaza continue to die in different ways. After continuous debate in the United States Congress about the war in Iraq, President George Bush presented a White House statement defending his war strategy. He left the issue of resolving this costly struggle, which is not supported by the American public, to his successor as United States President. Bush condoned the recommendations by the top United States Army commander in Iraq, David Petraeus, to complete a limited drawdown of troops in July, and freezing a withdrawal afterwards for 45 days for further security assessments. The United States President based his decision on the recommendations by field army chiefs, refusing to set a timetable for the withdrawal of United States troops from Iraq.
After 5 years of war in Iraq, the American people no longer expect their president to change any of his policies on the war. As usual, Bush confirmed the success and advancements achieved in Iraq. He warned of the danger from al-Qaeda and terrorism if U.S. troops withdraw from Iraq.
As General
Petraeus told Congress, American and Iraqi forces have made significant progress in all these areas. While there is more to be done, sectarian violence is down dramatically. Civilian deaths and military deaths are also down. Many neighborhoods once controlled by al-Qaeda have been liberated, and cooperation from Iraqis is stronger than ever.
Thus, Bush decided what no one doubted: the situation in Iraq will continue as is until he leaves the White House.
I think there's no question.
I think there is no question that President George Bush hopes for things to continue as they are until he leaves the White House. General Petraeus is capable of keeping the situation as it is until December or January of next year. The new president, whether a Democrat or Republican, will have to deal with the situation in Iraq.
President Bush's speech in the Congress followed a heated session of listening to General Petraeus and Ambassador Ryan Crocker. They focused on two issues: al-Qaeda's waning influence in Iraq due to the increase in the number of U.S. troops, and Iran's destructive role in Iraq. Under persistent questioning by the Senate, General Petraeus refused to determine the preferred conditions for the new reduction of time of the U.S. troops' deployment. This in spite of demands by high-ranking military personnel like George Casey, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, to decrease the duration of deployment due to the weakness of U.S. troops following the surge 6 months ago in Afghanistan and Iraq. During the session, the Democrats focused on the most important issue concerning the American people: the high cost of the war, while the U.S. faces the danger of going into a recession. However, there is also a criticism of the positions taken by the Democrats opposing the war, including the two candidates, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton.
The Democrats took control of the Congress.
When the Democrats took control of the Congress, they had the opportunity to use their power to influence this war, but they chose not to use it. If we compare this war with the Vietnam War, we will find that in the 70s, the Congress stood against the war by cutting funding. Today, the Congress has to follow in the same way, because nothing else will stop the war in Iraq.
According to this university professor, the Democrats want to avoid looking like they're not supporting their troops in Iraq if they decide to stop funding the war. Things will remain as they are. According to the majority leader for the Democrats in the Senate, the U.S. president has a withdrawal strategy only for himself. Meanwhile, the next president will inherit the problem of finding a way out of Iraq. For Al-Madar, this is Nathan Al-Madawi, Abu Dhabi, Washington.
American politicians are professionals at assassination, killing, lying, and escaping forward. Their principle is hypocrisy.
They kill each other and their friends. They launch wars and kill nations. They destroy civilizations and create divisions. They label and categorize people. Of course, we are referring to the hawks and doves of the American administration.
الولايات المتحدة تاريخ حافل.
The United States has a long history full of crimes, assassinations, and discrimination, and the worst is yet to come in the future. Nations around the world are proud of their civilizations and heritages, but the United States insists on building their own civilization and history on the bodies and blood of other nations. America has excelled in killing people and occupying countries and dividing them. They annihilate nations as a way to implement their plans and conspiracies. The United States has not allowed anyone to protest its craziness, even if they were American citizens or presidents. The list includes Len Colin, James Carville, William McKinley, and John Kennedy, who refused to go along with racism. It also includes Martin Luther King and other international thinkers and politicians. The American killing machine, symbolized by the CIA, has reached all over the world, committing the ugliest crimes and assassinations.
مخابراتها CIA امتدت إلى أبعد نقطة في العالم.
It was responsible for the incitement in Salvador and the assassination of President Salvador Allende and Che Guevara, as well as the presidents of the Dominican Republic and Congo. Also tried to assassinate the Cuban president Fidel Castro and committed many other crimes that have not been revealed yet. All this has been done under the pretext of spreading democracy and human rights. The Vietnamese people remember these pretexts very well. The Afghan and Iraqi people are paying the price for this. Hundreds of Iraqis are killed every day and millions have been displaced. American democracy has been used as a justification to force the Palestinians to leave their homes, who have been subjected to hunger, torture, and a siege in the name of spreading human rights. Meanwhile, the Cuban people are flourishing without the so-called American democracy and development. This is only the tip of the iceberg. American policy continues to attack nations and free leaders of the world.
تشجع للمزيد من دماء الشعوب والقادة والأحرار في العالم.
Well, moving on, France is sending 700 additional troops to Afghanistan, raising the number of French troops there to about 3,000. Foreign Minister Bernard Kouchner said his country aims to continue fighting extremism in Afghanistan alongside Afghan forces. He said President Sarkozy's decision was not spontaneous and that all coalition members had been informed beforehand. Following a U.S. call on all NATO members to contribute additional troops to Afghanistan in last week's NATO summit in Bucharest, Sarkozy agreed to deploy 700 additional troops there. Some 70,000 international troops, most of them under NATO command, are in Afghanistan to fight the Taliban insurgency.
British opposition lawmakers and anti-arms campaigners are stepping up calls for reopening of an inquiry into alleged bribery and corruption between Britain's arms maker BAE and Saudi Arabia. The demands come a day after the country's High Court said the decision to drop the case in December 2006 was unlawful. The investigation into the $85 billion arms deal began in 2004, but former Prime Minister Tony Blair pressured Britain's Serious Fraud Office to drop the inquiry. British newspapers have harshly criticised the government over the issue, saying justice was swept aside. Leader of the opposition Liberal Democrats, Nick Clegg, is now calling on the office to proceed with the original investigation. Anti-arms groups also want the government to give free rein to the office.
We were stunned by the government's hypocrisy on corruption. In Britain, prosecutors are quietly taken to one side and pressured into abandoning a corruption investigation that might upset powerful interests at home and abroad.
General Petraeus came to Capitol Hill to answer questions about the Iraq War. He talked about security and troop cuts, among other things, but one item was missing from the agenda. What did the general forget to talk about? The answer to this question and more on Link TV's Mosaic Intelligence Report.
When General David Petraeus and U.S. Ambassador to Iraq Ryan Crocker testified before a Senate committee this week, they pointed to security improvements and a drop in violence in Iraq over the last year. But there was one issue never mentioned. That's the issue of Iraqi refugees. According to the UN Refugee Agency and the International Organization for Migration, almost 5 million Iraqis have now been displaced by violence in their country. Over 2.4 million fled their homes for safer areas within Iraq, up to 1.5 million are living in Syria, and more than 1 million refugees fled to Jordan, Iran, Egypt, Lebanon, Turkey, and the Gulf states. I've just returned from Syria and Jordan, where the influx of Iraqi refugees has created an enormous burden on these countries and is a massive humanitarian crisis.
Some people are killed because of their last name. Others get killed because they are Shias or because they are Sunnis. What is this democracy they brought us? We don't want them or their democracy.
Meanwhile, many of the Syrians and Jordanians I've spoken to are starting to complain about the effects of the Iraqi arrivals and the resulting crowded schools and rising rents and real estate prices.
The Iraqis come in different forms. Some Iraqis are honorable, but others are involved in illegitimate activities. They ruined our country and burdened it economically.
The initial wave of refugees, the vast majority of whom were wealthy Sunnis, went to Jordan, where the locals labeled them as the Mercedes refugees. In Syria, the situation is different, as the Iraqi refugees are diverse in terms of ethnicity and religious affiliation. But they are less fortunate than those who went to Jordan and typically live in cramped, barely heated basement apartments. Most of them have experienced the violent death or disappearance of an immediate family member. In most cases, families were given only hours or even minutes to prepare for departure. This family I spoke to was threatened to be killed and was given 48 hours to depart. They blame the Iraqi government and the Americans.
5 years passed like 500 years. What took thousands of years to build was destroyed by the U.S. in 5 years. I went to my town to visit my family and couldn't find the road to get to their house. There's no water, no electricity. We went for 1 week and couldn't wait to get back to Syria.
Human trafficking, domestic violence, and prostitution are on the rise, something humiliating to the Iraqi refugees and a taboo subject in the Arab world. In Syria, I observed Iraqi teenage prostitutes working near hotels and wealthy Damascus neighborhoods. According to an NGO official, many Iraqi women in Syria are choosing prostitution because it's far more lucrative than the $150 monthly stipend from the United Nations. The United States is taking almost none of these refugees. In 2007, the U.S. administration initially indicated it would accept 7,000, but ultimately took only 1,600, something the general, the ambassador, and President Bush failed to mention. This is Jamal Dajani for the Mosaic Intelligence Report, reporting from Damascus, Syria. To learn more about this program or to share your thoughts, visit us at linktv.org/mosaic.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.